Yo, so today I'm going to be breaking down this bouncy dark melody, maybe for someone like Lil Baby, and then throwing some drums on it at the end. Alright, so the sound I started off with is from Analog Labs. It's a classic synth key called Round 5 Robin. Really doesn't sound like synthy at all, it more sounds like a mallet, but overall it's just a great preset. And then here's the MIDI for it. Unfortunately I can't break it down from scratch just because there's a lot going on in this melody and it was very crackly when I did try to, but I went ahead and made this in D sharp minor originally, so I'll go ahead and pitch it down there just so I can explain it a little bit easier. And overall this is a pretty simple melody and you can break it down into layers really easily. So for the first layer right here, it's just the root note of the scale, so that's D sharp, just copied over again so it hits every 2 bars, and then that duplicated down an octave. And then I went ahead and took F sharp and F and just kind of made this rhythm. So originally this was down an octave, but I pitched it up just because it sounded nice. And this little section just kind of repeats over the entire melody, but again this is up an octave. And that also continues into the second half where I just pitched it up 5 to kind of make it sound a little bit different and match the second chord, which is B, a little bit nicer. And then for the second layer, it's kind of the same notes but just kind of stacked on top of each other, so it makes kind of half a chord. So you can see right here again the F sharp and the F, and then the root note being D sharp, but it's offset a little bit so everything kind of hits at a different time, and overall just makes it a little bit more bouncy. And I'm sure I'm going to mention this a bunch in this video, but if you use F sharp and F, or B and A sharp, 2 notes that are just next to each other in the scale, overall it just makes it sound a little bit more dark and nice sounding for dark melodies. And then with the little half chords, when I copied it over into the second half, I did make another change as well. So instead of this being at D matching the root note, it's at B, but it's also pitched up an octave, because if it was pitched down an octave like it was here, it would have just clashed with this little rhythm, dark rhythm section, I guess, and it just wouldn't have sounded very nice. So I went ahead and pitched it up just to kind of give it some space, and overall it sounded pretty solid. And then for the last layer in this melody, which is just this super repetitive top line, again, it just uses notes next to each other in the scale using F sharp and F, and then D sharp being the root note of the chord again. I kind of just use the same notes for everything in this melody, but they're really spaced out at different octaves, so it does sound okay. And then I just repeated this little section over and over again 4 times. And then the variation in this is this first note gets pitched up to A sharp on the second one, and then on the fourth one it gets pushed up to G, and then these 3 notes kind of get shifted up one. So instead of this being at D sharp, it's at F, and then this F goes up to F sharp. And then the final thing that I did is kind of layer a high note where the clap would hit. So if this was a drum pattern, the clap would hit right there. Overall, I just kind of doing this in my melodies a lot recently, and I like the way it sounds. And then the final thing I did here in the second half is just added some like descending notes that are really high. I really don't know why I did this, but it ended up sounding okay in the end. And then I had to render that out because I only have the demo version of Analog Labs, but before I did, I went ahead and threw some effects on it. So I started off with this halftime on the half preset. I turned the smoothing all the way to FX and then turned the mix down to 60%. Then I went ahead and added Valhalla frequency echo with the delay and the feedback turned up and the shift turned down just slightly. Chorus on the default preset turned halfway down. Gross beat on the half beat gate turned 3/4 of the way down, and then a low cut and an imager just to make it feel nice and wide. So after all those effects got put on and it got rendered out, here's what it sounds like. And then for the second sound, I went back into Analog Labs and grabbed this organ called Cave Oasis. Overall, another just good sounding preset. And then for the MIDI for that, it just copies the exact same thing, so there really isn't much explaining. And then with the effects, again, just copies the exact same chain with the halftime and frequency echo and everything. But then I did put some additional effects once I rendered it out. So I started off with gross beat again on the half beat gate, but this time instead of turning the mix down, I just left it all the way up. Put Fruity Flangus on, I believe on the classic flanger preset, and then automated the mix knob. And then I put this EQ on, which just cuts the lows, and then I automated this high cut knob here. So basically when it gets automated, it just moves the high section and leaves the low cut. And then finally just added a pancake on the shy preset with the LFO turned on 4 bars. And then for the automation clips, I just went ahead and did a little slide chain with the flanger kind of thing. And then with the high cut on the EQ, I just kind of have it gradually fade out. Overall, it doesn't really make that big of a change, but it just makes it a little bit more interesting and has a little bit more movement. So really that just kind of sits in the background and adds kind of just a nice rhythm to the melody. Then for the next sound, I went into Omnisphere in the Trons and Optical folder and grabbed this noisy dual sit tone on tape preset. And then here's what I did with the MIDI. Overall, it really doesn't copy much from the other one, but if I go ahead and push this down, again, it's just those same chords that I used in the previous MIDIs with the F sharp and F and then the root note. And then again, it gets pitched up 5 here and then goes down to B to match the root note of the other MIDI. And then this top line is just kind of some random notes that I found in the other MIDI but didn't really play like this. Overall, I just kind of clicked it in by ear till it sounded good. And then for the effects on that, I added D-Blue Glitch, which is basically just like Effectrix or Looperator, just the free budget version. And I went ahead and added some reverses, so there's 2 reverses within the 4-bar pattern. And then I went ahead and added a halftime, again with the FX turned all the way to that side, but this time it's on 1 bar and the mix is on 70 instead of 60. Then I went ahead and added a low cut and then magic switch turned down just a touch to make it a little bit less overbearing. So after all those effects and I rendered it out, here's what it sounds like. And then for the next sound, I believe this is a free contact bank, but it's called Kinetic Treats. And I went ahead and used this record player wind up too. Overall, it's just kind of an interesting accent sound, and I like the way it sounded, so I threw it in the melody. And then for the MIDI for this, it goes ahead and copies the clap notes that were very high in the original MIDI. So it goes from F and then this D, which would be the one that hit where the clap would hit. And then over here it goes B and then back to the D. So overall, it's a very, very subtle accent noise, but it does add a little bit to the melody and it sounds pretty interesting. And then for the effects on that, I have Valhalla Supermassive just on the default preset, but I turned the warp up to 30. And then again, frequency echo, but this time with the shift turned up, and then the delay and feedback also turned up just slightly. And then for the next sound, it's from a Fabo one-shot kit that I like to use. It's called Jacob Piano. And here's the MIDI for it. It pretty much just copies some of those little like half rhythm chords, I guess you'd call them, and then the root note. And it doesn't change or anything for the second half, like moving down to B. But then with all the other notes, it just kind of copies other notes that were in the scale or just little repetitions that I like the way they sounded. So like this copies the top note of like the half chords here. This is all the same. This copies from the little dark rhythm section. This is the root note. And then these are copies from the repetitive top line. But what makes it sound really cool is all the effects I put on it. So I did Baby Comeback, which is a free delay plugin, and used the analog flavor, turned it to 1/16 and turned the feedback just a little bit down. Then I did halftime, again just turning down the mix a little bit to get some high end to come through and leaving it on 1 bar. Then I did frequency echo again putting the shift down a little bit, turning the delay and the feedback up. And then I threw a vocoder on, and I quite honestly don't know what this does, but I went ahead and automated this knob right here, which is like a fine pitch automation, or I guess it's called formant pitching, because it doesn't change like the pitch of it, but it changes the way it sounds. It's really weird, but it sounded cool. And then I went ahead and just threw some reverb and then a low cut on it. So after I put all those effects on it, I ended up reversing it, and here's what it sounds like. And then for the next sound, I used the Softy Bell from Flowers Volume 1, I believe. I say this all the time, but it's one of my favorite kits and just a good sound. All right, and then here's the MIDI for it. Again, it's very simple. So it copies the D sharp, that's the root note, and then slides up 2 octaves to F, and then quickly changes to F sharp. So it's just a really quick slide, like accent sound, but it does add quite a bit to the melody. And then I didn't end up putting any effects on this, so here's what it sounds like. And then for the final sound besides the bass, it's this whoa guitar. I'm pretty sure I used this in my last video, but it's like a nice thing to layer with the bass. And then I had to go ahead and turn up the hold just like an 808 pretty much. And then the MIDI for this, again, is pretty simple. So it just copies the bass notes, that's D sharp and B, and then just kind of slides up to random notes that I thought were nice. And then I went ahead and added this G at the end just because I thought it would sound nice to have this going when the drums would drop. So here's what it sounds like. That last note will just make it a little bit more interesting when the drums drop. It also kind of adds a little bit of tension. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's kind of how it feels. All right, and then the final sound is the Mike Dean bass from the Neon Pop sound kit. Again, I think I used this in the last video as well, but I made some changes to this one. So I went and found the LFO that was connected to the filter, and then I went ahead and brought it down a little bit and then gave it a little bit of space. So it kind of has like a wah feel, almost like it makes that sound. So originally it was here, and then I just brought it down to something like this. And then here's the MIDI for it. Not much to explain because it is a bass. It just copies the bass notes. And then I went ahead and added this A sharp at the end just to make the drum drop a little bit more interesting. So here's what it sounds like. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the melody, but I did add one more thing. I went ahead and made my own little drum loop here, so I grabbed two textures from the Fabo one-shot kit and then have them cutting in and out between each other. It just adds a really nice like rhythm to it, and I just started doing this, and it makes adding textures a little bit more interesting rather than just like throwing a vinyl texture on it. Makes it a little bit more special. And then grabbed this perc loop that's called Kiss and Tell, again from the Flowers Volume 1 one-shot kit. So this ends up sounding pretty cool and sounds like this. So yeah, overall I think this melody turned out pretty snazzy, and here's what everything sounds like together. So yeah, that's what it sounds like, and now we can get started on the drums. Alright, so that's going to be pretty much it for the video. I ended up liking the way the drums turned out. That doesn't happen that often. But yeah, this will also probably make an appearance on the type beat channel I made. The link is probably in the description. So I'll just post the beats that I make for videos over there and on BeatStars and everything. So if you want to hear the full thing, it'll be on that channel instead of this one. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your morning. Bye.
Pineapple!